what I'd like you to do, if you are a Labour supporter, there's your action. You need to get onto them and get some support against the TPPA on our side to be influencing Labour there, because at the moment their position is quite weak. Okay, so Labour supporters, there's your job. That's what you need to be doing. If you're not in support of any particular political party, now's the time to be interested in politics. You know, our future is at stake, and unfortunately the TPPA is a political beast. Okay? Just back to the Labour Party, they've got a brand new trade spokesperson, apparently, starting after the break, and his name's David Clark, I know, because I rang up the other day and they've put me through to the new person. I've written to him to try and clarify a position, but he's on holiday, so he hasn't written back. Oh, and United Future Peter Dunn was invited tonight, but unfortunately he's busy tonight.
Always busy.
Okay. So, now look, this isn't supposed to be a party political broadcast, but I've been very impressed with New Zealand First's work. There is a New Zealand First member at the back who has some forms if you want to start being politically active and joining New Zealand First. Just thought I'd put that in there. Right, we will quickly go on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is an academic viewpoint. I've heard Geoff Sluka speak before and was very impressed. Geoff is the Associate Professor from the School of People, Environment and Planning at Massey University. Please everyone give him a big welcome.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Just as a preliminary comment, I'm a social anthropologist because People, Environment, and Planning School means nothing. It's just an administrative block. I'm a social scientist. I'm a cultural or social anthropologist. And I wasn't going to say anything about the U.S. agenda, but since Fletcher mentioned, I'll just real quickly mention, do you notice that it's called the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, but the biggest economy in the Pacific isn't included in it? China. And the reason is because part of the hidden geopolitical American agenda is to maintain U.S. economic hegemony against the challenge of the rising economic power of China. Right. Anyway, so it's just something, no one mentions that, so I thought I'd throw that out there. Well, anyway, my interest in free trade agreements is their impact on poverty, democracy, the environment, and native peoples or indigenous peoples. In my political anthropology class, I teach that that free trade agreements have globalized poverty, they've undermined democracy, they've contributed to the environmental crisis, which is currently the greatest crisis our species has ever faced on this planet. In my endangered cultures class, I teach that the free trade agreements have been an unmitigated disaster for the world's indigenous people, and that means that this trade agreement will be a disaster for Maori people in this country. It will directly challenge Treaty of Waitangi rights. These treaties have globalized poverty by liberating capital to abandon people in search of lower labor costs, and they run directly counter to fundamental notions of human rights. Again, if I had time, I could talk about how they undermine human rights. Maybe someone will ask a question about that later. Some background, the TPP is the largest trade deal in history, so we know by looking at at other trade deals what their effects have been, and they've been almost all negative except for the 1% at the top, and this is a mega trade deal. So if we can anticipate that it will have roughly the same kinds of effects that previous trade deals had, but in a much larger scale, then it's truly frightening. It's a supersized trade agreement involving 12 countries. It represents almost 800 million people, 40% of the world's economy. It's been described as a free trade agreement on steroids. But look at the results, again, of the previous free trade agreements, NAFTA, GATT, the MIA. They promised the same thing that this trade agreement promises, the glories of globalization, prosperity across the land. But they did not deliver. What they did
the only thing they actually achieved was they globalized poverty. They made multinational corporations obscenely profitable, but at the same time destroyed the lives of millions of workers. They did not create jobs. Instead, they contributed to mass job losses, lower wages, waves of forced migration, soaring inequality, and escalating environmental degradation. The overall global effects of the previous free trade agreements has been that the rich have gotten richer and have grown more powerful, while everyone else, that's us, has gotten poorer and more powerless. You may have seen that Oxfam report that came out last week that said that the top 56 richest people on the planet now own more than the bottom half of the world population, or 3.6 billion people. We sometimes refer to them as the 1%, but 56 people, that's not even 1%. That's 1/100th or 1/1000th of 1%. And that's a direct consequence of neoliberal economics, of which free trade agreements are one of the cornerstones. So the rich have gotten richer and more powerful, and everyone else has gotten poorer and more powerless. The multinational corporations today, the big ones, are larger than most countries, particularly small countries like our own. Of the 51 of the world's top largest 100 economies are multinational corporations, and only 49 are countries. So you understand that when a country like us goes up against a multinational, it's bigger and richer than we are. It has more power and more money to contest these things than our whole country does. So it's not just about wealth, it's also about political power. The rich and large multinational corporations have grown more politically powerful at the direct expense of governments, which have declined in power relative to them. And as Fletcher mentioned, Tim Grosser even admits that, but don't worry about it. In an era of globalization, multinational companies are getting more and more political power and public influence. So the real promise of the TPP is that it will lead to even more obscene levels of corporate profits for the 1%, but job losses, lower wages, higher prices, loss of sovereignty, loss of democracy, less internet freedom, and environmental destruction for everyone else, and potentially genocide against indigenous peoples. And again, Tim Grosser and John Key have already admitted that our Farm Act drug prices are going to go up. They said, but we aren't going to pay for it. He said they'll go up, but he isn't, but we, the taxpayers, are, because the money has to come from somewhere, right? John Key claims that there are billions of dollars in economic benefits, but John Key is a bankster. He believes in trickle-down economics, which are zombie economics. It means that we all know it doesn't work that way, but the idea trundles on like a zombie anyway. And did you notice again that John Key said, well, every time they have told the public about what they think the anticipated monetary gains will be for New Zealand, that the number has gone down. And now what John Key says is that, and we won't see those gains for 15 to 20 years. No one, even economists, can tell us what the economy is going to do tomorrow, let alone the global economy in the next 15 to 20 years. So promises that in 15 or 20 years we'll see economic benefits of this trade agreement are total pie in the sky. These so-called free trade agreements are classic trickle-down economics. We know that the global economic system under neoliberalism doesn't work that way. The money goes in at the top, it stays at the top. My supervisor at Berkeley, my graduate school, used to say that it was like believing that if you put your petrol in your radiator, it'll trickle down to the petrol tank. The system simply doesn't work that way. So, in effect, free trade deals boost the top 1%, the 56 people that now own half of the world, and bust the rest. The corporations, the banks, and rich investors reap 99% of the benefits, and they make out like bandits, and we, everyone else, get what's left. So this is the chimera of growth, of economic growth. What the government says is that this, and labor apparently believes this too, that free trade agreements will lead to economic growth. But the problem is, if the economic growth goes in at the top and stays at the top, it doesn't benefit everyone, does it? So there's this idea, economic growth benefits everyone. No, it does not, and it has not for the last 30 years. 99% of the economic growth that we have gained has gone to 1% of the people at the top. Don't believe it when they say that economic growth will automatically benefit you. So in short, the rich get the gold and we get the shaft. The economy grows, but inequality increases because it concentrates at the top and doesn't trickle down to the middle and lower classes. And an example of that here in Aotearoa, just to make it relative to us, is you know that 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, the richest person in New Zealand was the beer baron, Doug Myers, the Myers family, and he was worth a whopping $325 million. And we all go, man, that's a lot of money. Well, you know, today, Graham Hart is New Zealand's richest man. He's worth $8.5 billion. The TPP is a terrible trade deal, which isn't even about free trade. It's about monopoly and corporate power amounting to corporate takeover. It mostly does not, in fact, deal with trade. It mainly deals with establishing what's called a partnership for corporate protectionism. Nations that join must conform their laws and rules to the agreement's strictures, effectively supplanting sovereignty and canceling out our right to be self-governing. It does this by handing foreign corporations the power to overturn New Zealand laws if their profits are threatened, or preventing New Zealand from making laws which may threaten their profits. So as Fletcher, I believe, mentioned, if, for example, the government decided to raise the minimum wage, that would impact on all the multinationals who operate here's profit line, and they could sue us for that. So when Parliament debates the idea of raising the minimum wage, they have to take that into account, that they would be sued. So we can't raise the profit. We'll be sued for hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, how can we afford that? So it becomes part of the process by which our parliamentarians make decisions about the laws they might make to protect labor rights, environmental protections, minimum wage, etc., etc. So the central danger, as Fletcher stressed, is the ISDS. So this free trade agreement has been described as a corporate Trojan horse. You remember the story of the Trojan horse. On the outside, it's a gift. Economic growth, end of tariffs, right? Money. But on the inside is the real agenda of the Trojan horse, right? There's some soldiers in there that are going to come out and destroy your city. And the ISDS is that in the soldiers inside the Trojan horse. This is what the corporations really want, is the ISDS. So outrageous is so Fletcher described it, and let me elaborate a little bit on it. I won't say again that it's these three corporate lawyers, but as he said, the point is that here in our country, in our courts, we set the rules, and some of those rules are very fundamental basics of jurisprudence and justice, and they include, for example, the right to face your accuser, the right of representation. People can make appeals to the court. If any citizens group wants to intervene in one of these ISDS settlements and present a case or make a point, we have no rights to. They have no right to be heard. No one has a right to be heard except the two the judges, or the two lawyers, right? So no group can say, can we come and address the tribunal? No, you cannot. And you can't challenge its decisions. And as Fletcher stressed, it's also in many cases going to be a fact that you can't even see the details of the decision because it can be done in secret and be kept confidential, which you can't do in our normal courts, you see. So outrageous is the ISDS arrangement that The Economist, who again Fletcher mentioned, which is usually a champion, it's a kind of right-wing business journal, is usually a champion of corporate power and trade treaties, came out against it. They said that it is, quote, a way to let multinational companies get rich at the expense of ordinary people. So already, thanks to the insertion of this power, the settlement dispute power in the previous trade agreements, NAFTA, GATT, MIA, big business has been engaged in an orgy of litigation, been described in the press as an orgy of litigation, whose purpose is to strike down any law that might impinge on their anticipated future profits. So Fletcher mentioned some of the basic ones, the Swedish Vattenfall case against Germany for ending nuclear power, and we all know about the Philip Morris case against Australia, Venezuela, and Sweden. They have multiple cases about plain packaging, and we did see that, in fact, Australia won its case against Philip Morris. But you know what? It cost them between $80 and $100 million to win that case. So even though they won, the cost to the taxpayers was $100 million. So even if we can win in this court, it will cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. And can we afford that? No, we cannot, obviously. So I had other examples. I won't give you examples of ISDS, but I will point out something else.